We only have what we give. So just imagine if Isabel Allende was part of your chalice circle, that she was sitting there and you had this spiritual exercise that you had to work with this month, where you were supposed to say in 3 minutes or less, describe the moment you became a very generous person, right? And so she went first. And in this audio essay that we just listened to from This I Believe was her response. That would kind of be amazing. That's what I thought of when I heard it. Now, she packed a lot in 3 minutes, and I know she probably had months to write it ahead of time and then record it. So it was perfect. So let me summarize some of the key points for you so you can kind of get it in your head again. It starts out very typical. She says, I was a very, very busy person and I was living with a lot of energy in my life. And I really had it got in the way of understanding what I truly believe, to truly understand the spiritual nature of my values. And I think that speaks to all of us. Life is very, very busy, at least in American society generally. And most of us don't have time to sit down and kind of go, well, what do I really think about that? Right. At least for me, I didn't have that opportunity until I got to seminary, which you should go to seminary just for that purpose, to slow down life. It's kind of expensive, but I enjoyed it. But anyway, and then obviously in her life, it takes a traumatic and very tragic event, her daughter Laura's death after a year in a coma, to trigger a spiritual reflection for her. Now, think about that, those of you who've raised children, or even if you were a child who was raised, when you're 28, typically you think, oh, I'm out on my own, or your kid's out on your own, don't have to worry about them anymore. This is cool. They'll come home for Thanksgiving and things like that. And in this case, and they were living in California at the time, she just contracted some horrible illness, fell into a coma, and never came out of it at the age of 28. So, of course, I think you would spend a lot of time. It sounds like her year shut down and she took care of her at home. So, you have a lot of time for spiritual reflection and a journey. And she said she grounded herself in her quote, the principles that held her together, unquote. She discovered that there was actually quite a lot of consistency in her life from the time she was young to where she was at that point. That she says her writings, her beliefs, and the way she just lived her life all reflected four principles. They're not really principles, but just characteristics of her. One is just her lust for life. And you can tell just by, if you know anything about Isabel Allende or read any of her novels, there is quite a passion for life in everything she does. She's clearly very independent. She craves justice. Her uncle, who was assassinated in Chile, was a socialist, and so very much into liberal causes, and particularly her foundation to help young girls. And then her last statement was, falls madly in love easily. So I had to research her. She's on her third husband right now. And there isn't a lot of time between them. So it's like they break up and within a year she's married again. So I believe that one falls madly in love easily. So her daughter's coma. She talks about it. She said when that happened, she lost everything. Her world kind of came to a screeching hot stop, and she thought she'd lost everything. Except then she remembered she has the love that she's still giving her while she's in her coma. And even if Laura never knew that she was there, never obviously responded to the love, she still had it in her and was giving it to her. And that's kind of all that mattered at that point. And then she talks about that shift in her perspective more internally just began to fill her with even more love. And it began to multiply to beyond just taking care of her daughter, particularly after her daughter died, into the rest of the world. And she said at this point, she's happier loving than to receiving love. And I loved her quote in there. There's a lot of chuckles in the room. She loves her dog. She loves her husband. She loves all these things. And she doesn't even know if they like her. But it doesn't matter. Her job is to give them love, which just is wonderful. But this tragic experience, she said, gave her a new mantra. You only are, or you only have what you give, which is, I love that. And I made it the title of the sermon today. You only have what you give. It is by spending yourself that you become rich. She says, give, give, give. It is in giving that I connect to others, the world, and the divine. It is in giving that she connects to others, the world, and the divine. Wow. So I was inspired by her story, and it seems like a lot of you were very attentive as well. So I'm going to tie it back to our values. So I need to adjust my screens here a second. So hang on. So I'm going to go back to this symbol again and talk about um, the value that we read together. I'm going to take what Allende has offered us and look at it through the lens of this principle. So I'm going to rephrase it a little bit and say, in order to live a love-centered life, or in order to support love-centered congregations, we cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. And our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. So this is the part it's going to turn into a teaching moment, because at the end of this year, when we get to General Assembly next June, it's 100% virtual, so everybody can be a part of it and vote on accepting these. These are the final moments of this. So it's my job to make sure everybody understands it as we go along. So I'm going to take what I read and pull it apart and talk a little bit about what each part of it means. So the first part is we cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. Now, all of the values are written in the same format every single time. And the first statement is the definition. So what does generosity mean? So I looked up a lot of the terms to see if I had the definitions correct. So cultivate is the first one. Cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. In this case, the definition of cultivate from dictionary.com would be to seek, to promote, or foster. So then you get into this generous spirit of gratitude and hope. That's what I would call it. And I would say Allende would have called this her lust for life. She just approaches the world with a lot of generosity. So in my case, I would say gratitude and hope would be always acknowledging the gifts of others, everyone around me, whether it's time or effort or money, that's a big one, or even just their physical presence. And kind of regardless of the quality or quantity, because that's a judgment and that's an opinion. But the fact that it's just there and being grateful for the fact that we engaged in life should be enough. I think this spirit of hope is embedded into this as well. And I think Unitarian Universalists, if for anything, we're eternal optimists. I mean, one of the things that keeps getting quoted is the moral arc of the universe ultimately bends towards justice. I mean, if that isn't a leap of faith and eternal optimism, I don't know what is. So this spirit of hope is kind of this feeling that at the end of the day, things will turn out for the best. So I don't want to be totally Pollyannish in this and trying to get my head wrapped around definitions. Sometimes I think of the opposite, and it helps clarify it to me. So I wrote down the opposite of that would be a culture of scarcity and doubt. And so it's sort of like if you come into a space or you have a friend that's not having a great week and it's like owing it awful, how is this ever going to end? And they get wrapped around that, and it's hard to escape that sometimes. Sometimes you have to process it. I get it. But this is sort of a believing in hope. Okay, enough about the definition. How shall we demonstrate this generosity with one another? It's we covenant. The next phrase is always the promise to each other. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, our presence, and our resources. Now, these words were chosen very deliberately, and there's a lot kind of stuffed into this one sentence. So what does it mean to freely and compassionate share these things? So freely and compassionate. Freely, I think, is kind of obvious, without hesitation, with a lot of enthusiasm. And compassionately, well, that stumped me in this case, because if I'm full of life and I just want to tell you about something or share something, What does compassion really have to do about it? So I had to think about that. I decided it comes up with, it's akin to humbly or tenderheartedly. Okay, people are nodding their heads. We can be tender and tenderhearted and humble, but it's really without being dogmatic, righteous, or condescending. So think about that. How many times have you run into somebody where they pretty much say, I've discovered the truth that discredits all else? And believe me, there's been times when there are Unitarian Universalists who have done the same thing, that they think they found the truth and discredit all else, which is not what we should be about. And then I thought, well, what compassionately? Think about Allende. When she was spending a year, spending most of her day talking to her daughter in a coma. Think about that level of compassion. If you're sharing with the world with that level of humility and compassion. So then sharing our faith. People are going to get a little tense in the room because it sounds like evangelicals and the people that knock on your door. That's not what we mean here. I think we should be the kind, and I believe we are the kind of people and place that we can't help talking about what we found here, both with outsiders and inside the fellowship. It means sharing your spiritual journey freely, generously, and compassionately with each other. It means learning and exploring with each other. Some of you have been brave enough to come up here and share your spiritual journeys very publicly, and that's very cool. But that doesn't mean you get a pass because you weren't brave enough to come up here. It should be the kind of thing that you've spent time on, and sometimes you just have some insight you want to share with your friends here. The next one is sharing our presence. That's a big one to me. I always have said this, and maybe if you're a board member, you've heard me say it. A healthy congregation is one where you come to see your friends that you really enjoy being with. And if I'm lucky, you stay for the sermon. Because I think most of you, and I was there at one point, you kind of look at the newsletter and you say, okay, who's speaking? What are they talking about? Do I want to get out of bed on a Sunday morning in the middle of the winter to go do that? And I was there too. And then I realized in my congregation, which some of you know, it was Appleton, I just loved the people there. And I didn't really care who was speaking and what they were talking about, because I would come half an hour early to make sure I could see everybody. And my ex-wife, that really bugged her because she's very introverted and didn't like to have to stand there and make small talk. But we worked through that. But it's all about the people. And then come, and I hope you stay for the sermon and the message. A healthy congregation keeps creating reasons to get together, whether it's a book group, whether it's the men's group, whether it's a music group, or I love it that we did the trick or trunk or treat, whatever it was called, in the parking lot for Halloween. I mean, just another reason to get together and enjoy each other's company. The garden out front, that's a good example as well. Be generous with your time and your physical presence. Just show up, even if it's virtually, because it demonstrates you care. Sharing resources. This is one that gets touchy because we don't like to talk about money, but this is money and talents. Allende said, what good is it to have talent and wealth if I don't share it? I'm not going to be cremated with it, so I better get rid of it ahead of time. I love that. Financial resources. Give beyond it being transactional. Some of you might have heard this story before, but I'm going to share it. When I first was an adult, young adult out of college, I was living in downtown Minneapolis, and I went to the big music church in town. It was congregational, liberal congregational. And, my parents always took care of money, and I think they were tithing and all that kind of stuff, came from a very conservative background. And I thought, well, what do? I don't have any money. I'm just starting out, but I should need to give something. I knew I needed to contribute to the church. And so I sat there and I thought, well, what would I spend for a community concert once a week on a ticket, like $10 or whatever it was at the time. So that's what I decided to give. So it was to me a reasonable way to come up with it, but it was clearly very transactional. I was showing up, I was getting music, and I was paying like a ticket price kind of thing. So I don't think that's really what we want. What we would want in this case is give as generously as you would a loved one. because we're trying to build a love-focused, love-centered congregation. So then I had this wacky idea, and I haven't even checked with the board. So, you can discredit it right away if you want. I decided, what if we put our fellowship on your holiday gift list? Because you're all giving gifts to loved ones, I'm assuming, whether they're family members or not. And what would you kind of spend on that present for a loved one? And I know you pledge, and I know you give monthly donations and that kind of thing, but what if you just wrote another check or something just for that same amount that you're giving a loved one because you love this place? I'm on the boards of all three congregations, and all three congregations have built into their budgets this year a deficit. Now, don't panic. They're small, and there's fundraising plans to get and cover it. But I just thought, my gosh, if everybody did that, it would almost be closed. So anyway, I think it would help us get beyond scarcity thinking about what we can afford all the time and free us up, because we didn't have a deficit anymore, to think about what else we'd like to do. Just a wacky idea. Talent. There are many ways to help out. Often they're kind of a one and done kind of thing, or infrequent needs. So if you're new here, ask anybody in the room that looks like they're in charge. I'm not going to introduce people. If it looks like they're in charge, they can either tell you what needs to be done, or they can point you to the person that can tell you that. So it's a good way to get involved in the congregation. I did that in Appleton when I first started. I thought, well, I'll get involved in something. In fact, the minister asked me to be on some committee right away. And what I discovered, I was kind of in a corporate kind of job, but was pretty unsure of myself in that kind of a setting. And I figured out that it was an leadership incubator, to just do things, be in charge, have to, come up with meetings and say something with people who actually love you and care about you. At work, you couldn't show that you were weak at all. So I couldn't do things like that there, but I found it very, very helpful. So just something to keep in mind. Leverage your interests and talents into another reason to get together. If you've got a hobby that you want to share with people, we can just set something up and come into the building. I keep bringing this up. I love that we're on Main Street. I don't have any idea how many people go by here every day, but it's got to be thousands of people. And I am here often in the evening, and it always disturbs me when it's just dark and I drive up and it looks like kind of we're out of business. And I love it when there's lights on in the evening when people go by and it looks like something's going on. And I love it that there's, again, more reasons for people to get together. So that's my idea of sharing your talent. The last part of this, how does all of this center us in love? Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. So I think the third phrase is tied back to our goal. How does this center us in love? How does our generosity connect us to one another in relationships and of interdependence and mutuality and love? I think it's Allende's final quote. It is in giving that I connect to others, the world, and the divine. If we meet the ideals outlined in this covenant that I just spent time sharing, loving relationships are the guaranteed result, in my opinion. So, back to that chalice circle. Isabel Allende just finished, and now it's your turn. What would you say about the moment you became a very generous person? Was it a gradual thing? Were you born into a household where generosity was just assumed and you learned it from a young child? Or was there a big event that made you really shift? I guess I have to step back. Do you even consider yourself a generous person? Would be a good place to start. In what ways are you generous? I just went on and on and on for 10 minutes about different ways you can be generous. Which ones did you identify with? And in what ways would you like to be more generous? So I'm not going to make you get up and talk for 3 minutes, but just think about that if that was your chalice circle. So to close, I'm going to go back to the story that Natalie shared with you in the Gathering Words. The story of the magic stone with the wise woman gave it generously to the hungry man she met on the mountain. He brought it back the next day saying this, I hope you can give me something even more precious than this precious stone. I hope you can give me whatever it is within you that made it so easy for you when I asked to just give it away. My friends, when we are asked to love, to trust, to give of ourselves, to share our blessings, I hope that we can say an easy and great yes. Amen. Now we're going to take a little time of quiet so the musicians can get going, but we can just kind of reflect on it.